The following talk was given at Mile High Church in Lakewood, Colorado. Please visit our website at milehighchurch.org.
Good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this virtual sanctuary of Mile High Church. And just like Tom's saying, we believe here that God is present everywhere. And one of those names we have for God is just unconditional love. And isn't that great to know that right where you are and right where I am, there is an unconditional love. No matter how we're feeling, no matter what we look like, no matter what's gone on in our day, maybe it's a great opportunity for each of us to let a little of that unconditional love into our hearts and minds as we prepare for this incredible service today. I'm so excited to hear from Reverend Chris Plym, an assistant minister here at Mile High Church. He's usually working behind the scenes in so many ways, and you've served our movement in so many incredible ways with our global services. You're such a presence, and I'm really excited that you decided to come out front and speak with us tonight. So we're thrilled to have you, and always great to be with you, Reverend Simon Shadowlight. And just thought, in the spirit of unconditional love, I think a lot of us sometimes find ourselves in communications, be it with family members, be it on social media, where sometimes those conversations can feel anything but loving at times. And I know each of you kind of has a background and some training in compassionate communication, nonviolent communications. And so I just thought I'd ask both of you tonight any ideas or techniques that you might have. In other words, help.
I hear you.
Reverend Simon, how
help
about
can
you?
be needed, especially in these times. The biggest thing that comes up for me when I think of nonviolent communication, compassionate communication, especially as taught by Marshall Rosenberg, is that the goal, the central, the context for the communication is empathy. Empathy for self and empathy for the other. So rather than, I've got to be right and I've got to prove my point, or I've got to make you wrong, or I've got to change your mind, how can I have empathy? I mean, even if we are having a discussion or, there's some contention or disagreement, can I still speak in a way in which I have empathy for who you are and what your needs are, while maintaining the empathy for my needs and then authentically expressing those. So when I hold that as a foundation, that's a good place to start.
I love that, Reverend Simon. And I would ask too, when it comes to having compassionate communication or nonviolent communication, what does environment have to do with it at all? Is there one environment that's better than another to have a courageous conversation with someone?
Well, I think there's so many elements to that. For instance, one that pops right into mind is I have to feel safe, right? Because if I'm going to speak from a place of authenticity, I need to be willing to have a certain degree of vulnerability. And I'm not going to be willing to be vulnerable if I don't feel safe. So whether that's actually a physical environment, as in, it's a place where I can focus on another person, we're not being involved, or it's not too hectic or chaotic, or it's just that inner environment and sense that I bring of how can I really be willing to be vulnerable enough that I can be authentic and not feel I have to attack you or change you, and it can allow you to be authentic.
Yeah, I love that one. I love the idea that to listen is to be vulnerable. Or Sakeesh Henderson, a great Native American teacher, said, to truly listen is to risk being transformed forever. And so I know for me, especially because I have a great love of thinking that I'm right, to be able to enter into communication and say, am I really listening? Is the person I'm talking to willing to listen to me? And is the environment safe? Because then I know I can deepen and change my mind, which sometimes changing my mind can be a bit of a scary thing. How about for you, Reverend Chris?
So many times when we're in the listening, we're trying to formulate our conversation back. I don't want to call it rebuttal, but we're in our mind already figuring out what we're going to say next, rather than being very present to the other person. And that's where we see their perspective. If we are busy trying to think of, well, what am I going to say next? Then I don't understand their perspective. I haven't gained anything in the conversation.
It is, and then it's not a conversation if there's no listening, right?
Yeah,
It's kind of statement after statement, and I think sometimes for me what happens as well is I can get so caught up in the news and what this person is saying and what this person is saying that sometimes I don't take the time to stop and think for myself. So in a conversation about something that's sensitive, and we have so many sensitive issues to talk about these days, sometimes I can catch myself and go, am I repeating something that I read, or have I really thought this through and I'm speaking for myself? So sometimes a courageous conversation can be kind of like getting caught, and it's important to know and have some of these more challenging conversations with people that we can trust. And for me, that's more important than even talking with someone that agrees with me, is if I know that there's the trust there to listen and go back and forth, I know that this person can actually, even if they disagree with me, help me articulate what it is I really think and believe so I can live it with greater clarity.
Absolutely.
Another technique that I use, if I know that I'm going to be meeting with or talking to someone whose views I either know or suspect are very different than mine, is to first of all start praying for them, to start looking at the world from their eyes, seeing that they are a spiritual being. They have their right to their opinion. They have whatever history that brought them to those opinions and values and perspectives. And if I'm praying for them, then I can see them in a different light.
I love that. And one more question for both of you is, if it sounds like a good idea to have a conversation at a particular time, but then all of a sudden it stops feeling safe, or my boundaries feel violated, or it's getting so hot, the conversation, not in a good way, then what are some things that I can do to pause or get out of there, or any signals when things get too heated on how to exit gracefully?
Sometimes it's fine just to say, hey, you know what? I'd like to take a pause on this. That's fine. It's like there's that thing out there like, no is a complete sentence.
Yeah.
And so if a conversation is getting heated and I'm like, and I catch that, I have the presence of mind to catch that because sometimes that's key. It's okay to say, hey, you know what? I'd like to get back to this later. And then that's it. And it's maybe time for me to go. I don't have to explain that, or I don't have to get your agreement that, yes, I do think it is time for us to end this conversation. No, it's like, hey, you know what, dude, this isn't working for me right now. I'll catch up with you later.
Yeah.
That's okay.
And sometimes it's about remembering what is the goal of this conversation. Is it to hear the person's point of view so that I can improve my own, or is it to convince them that I'm right about this or that? And sometimes, I don't have a value judgment on which of those is more important, but I know when that initial purpose of why we're talking in the first place has gone missing, I know that I'm probably in an unsafe place and I'm not contributing to an exchange of ideas, but maybe both of us, becoming more on fire or more, caught up in the unhealthy aspects of the argument itself.
One of the things I love that Rosenberg said that was really sort of eye-opening for me was that everything we do is an attempt to fulfill a need. Now, we could argue if we agree with that or not, because that's kind of an extreme statement. But when I've been in some contention with a person, if I can catch that and step back and go, whoa, what needs am I not feeling or being met right now for myself? And if I have the presence of mind, what needs might they have that are not being filled? I mean, acknowledgement, recognition, respect. I want to be heard. So rather than giving me your logical arguments of why I am or are not right, can you just empathize with me and acknowledge that you hear me? Once heard, that may negate all the tension and everything.
And my marriage has taught me that even though at times I know I'm right, I wind up wrong because I haven't used the skills that you're talking about. I haven't taken the time to listen, to be compassionate, and to love, which is often what my partner's calling for, not for me to be just so smart and right on a certain issue. And it's important to bring that into our relationships and all of our communications, I think, sometimes. So any resources, if anyone's looking for tools, you mentioned an author.
I mean, Marshall Rosenberg, who came up with the system nonviolent communication, also often referred to as compassionate communication, has tremendous resources. I mean, you can Google that and you'll get videos, hearing him speak, hearing him explain the process, books, tremendous amount of resources. Yeah.
Great, great.
Yeah, it would be the resource I would recommend also. Marshall Rosenberg.
Wonderful. And, I love listening to great conversations as well. And just, one thing before we close that I'm really working on is how can, when I'm experiencing criticism of some kind, get out of the taking it personally and say, as opposed to this person criticizing, what are they really trying to let me know about who they are? Because I've learned that in my life, that sometimes when someone's criticizing me, sometimes it's a valid criticism, but sometimes they're just trying to share something. And if I can get out of the sensitivity, I can hear from their heart what they're saying, and sometimes be evolved and even grateful for it in the end, even though it takes me a while.
You know, and that reminds me, there's a book called The Eye of the Storm.
Yes.
And in there, I can't remember who the author is, he says, ask the question, tell me more.
Uh-huh.
And when feeling criticized.
Gary Simmons, I think.
Yes,
Gary Simmons, yeah.
Tell me more.
I like it. Something for us all to practice.
Are we just worm food? Or as I might call it, Worm Food 101. So, a couple of things to share with you. Some of you may remember the little ditty you learned as a child. The worms crawl in, the worms crawl out, they play pinochle on your snout. The worms crawl in, the worms crawl in, out into your stomach and out your mouth. Now that you have just had a little tickle to your mind, I want to share a story that Dr. Patty gave to me when she found out what my topic was. I don't think she's ever had a chance to use this story. When Patty was quite young, she used to go fishing a lot with her cousins. And in those days, when you went fishing, you always used worms as your bait. So one day, her and her cousins had their little bait bucket and actually had some sandwiches, some lunch with them. And off they went fishing. Well, the cousins decided they were going to play a little trick on Dr. Patty. And so while she was off fishing, they added a little of the bait to her sandwich. So later that day, when Patty came back to eat her sandwich, she took a big bite and immediately recognized something was wrong. Patty says to this day, she cannot eat a bologna sandwich without being very careful about the sandwich. Now let's really talk about worm food and what we are. We recognize that we are actually composed of several parts. We have a physical body, which is the worm food, but we also have mental, emotional, and spiritual states. I'd like to read a quote from Dr. Holmes, our founder. We must come to believe that we not only have a soul, we must sense that this soul is immortal, eternal, deathless. If we are some part of infinity, then we are necessary to it, and it could not destroy any part of itself. It is impossible to live happily unless one believes in the integrity of his own soul and its union with the oversoul. So our belief in immortality, one of the fundamental concepts of the science of mind, is what lets us get beyond worm food, thinking about ourselves as just worm food. We can explore the other states of being that we are. John Philip Newell says, "Do we know within each of us is the unspeakably beautiful beat of the heart of the sacred. We are amazingly made. We are created in love, by love, with love, as Tom sung earlier. And because of this, we can have a great life." So let's first of all this evening talk about our mental body. And again, I want to start off with a quote from Dr. Holmes. While our physical bodies are definitely outlined and have a definite extension in space, our thought body, the realm of our feelings and emotions, the realm of our consciousness and thoughts is not so limited. The vibration of thought waves goes out like any other vibration, extending into space, and for all we know, traveling around the world, returning to us again on the theory that all energy must return to its source. Our mind is only limited by our personalization of it. So we have an opportunity to work with our mind, and I'm going to suggest to you some tools this evening to do that. Part of the mind's great gifts is our abilities to choose, to evolve, to create. And since choice is our birthright, we get an opportunity to decide how we're going to use this. There are two great scientists, Dr. Andrew Newberg and Dr. Mark Waldman, who have created or talked about some ways we can work with our mental states. Before I say that, though, I've got one more quote for you because I think it is so specific and particular to this discussion this evening. This is from Timber Hawkeye. When I felt life wasn't worth living because the world is too filled with too much hatred, anger, violence, and greed, I only had to change one thing to make my life worth living again: my perspective. So let's talk about Dr. Mark Waldman's and Andrew Newberg's theory of how to work with our mental states and improve them. They actually think that we can improve our neurological network through training our mind. So I'm going to invite you to share a practice with me. We don't have time to do the whole thing during this discussion, but I'll go through the steps and give you just a moment to reflect on them. First of all, the first step is to kind of get your blood flowing. So stretch, maybe move your neck, get the brain going, get blood flowing wherever. You can do a lot more stretching if you're at home. And then the next thing to do is to simply become quiet and focus on your breathing. And he suggests doing this for a minute. And if you like it, do it for another minute. Just focus on your breathing. Feel your stomach rising in and out. Again, I don't have time to give us all the minute. But then once you are done with that, then come out of that meditative state and allow your mind to wander. And as your mind is wandering, which it does naturally, you can ask it questions. You can ask it for insights. You can ask, how do I really feel about being quarantined? What is this anger I'm feeling? What is the next step in my life? All of those kinds of things can be asked in that state and move you forward. So there's a trick for improving your neurological network. Let's talk about the emotional body next, the emotional state that we're in. And quite frankly, right now, in this moment of time, we have a lot of emotions going on. You hear the emotions in the social media and the newspapers and maybe a discussion with a neighbor, wherever it is. There's emotions all over the place. Well, there are tools that we can use to work with our emotions also. But let's talk about some specific emotions. And an emotion that is coming to mind for me right now is grief. I think through the pandemic, so much of us felt we lost something. And sometimes we're not even sure what we lost, but it may have been a lifestyle, may have been a job, may actually have been a loved one. It may have been not being able to attend a significant event in somebody's life. All those losses can produce a form of grief in our life. And we now have an opportunity to work with that grief and move it to a different level. So I'm going to suggest some exercises this evening that we could do around up-leveling our emotions. The first one is simply journaling. Simply writing down, how did you get to the state you're in right now? What is creating that feeling? What is the feeling? If you have a lot of time to journal, you might get pretty deep on this. But if you don't, just jot a few items down, say, blah, there it is. I know that's what I'm feeling. Then I invite you to write down a few gratitudes. And maybe in the moment you're there, I just can't think of anything to be grateful for. Well, think about things like, perhaps you're sitting in a chair comfortably. You can be grateful for that. Perhaps you got up this morning. You can be grateful for that. Perhaps you had a conversation yesterday with someone you love. You can be grateful for that. So just create a few gratitudes. Then I invite you to take a deep breath, look at your gratitudes, and then walk away. Go about your daily life, daily business. But during the day, occasionally go back to those gratitudes. And every time you do, after you look at your gratitudes, after you look at your positive statements, then determine, do you feel a little bit better? What's your feeling level at that point? There is a author and teacher, David R. Hawkins. And I invite you to take a look at his work if you never have. But he has an emotional scale. His emotional scale starts with emotions like fear and anger and distrust and being betrayed and all the feelings that go with that. But slowly it works up to a feeling of neutrality. And then beyond the neutrality on his emotional scale are the feelings that we enjoy and that we're comfortable with. So feelings of happiness, elation, joy. It might just be, I'm comfortable now in the situation I'm in. Take a look at those emotional scales and see where you are if you need some ideas. Also, I would recommend to you, there's a ton of videos that David Hawkins and his followers have produced that will give you lots of ideas on other things you can do to improve your emotional states. I'd like to then talk about an actor, John Coburn. He's been in a lot of different TV series and recently a movie. And I want to go into his story because I think it exhibits some of the things I'm talking about today. When he was a young man and graduated from high school, he really had no idea of what he wanted to do. His father got him a job in a steel factory. And so while he was working on the job one day, he got hit in the back with a steel beam. He was incapacitated. He was in the hospital for several months, and when he came out, he was addicted to drugs and he walked with a cane. He felt his life was over, but his uncle said, why don't you go to community college? Why don't you just find a few things there? So he went to community college. He got, and by accident, he was in the cafeteria one day bemoaning his courses because the coursework was way over his head and nothing that he was really interested in. It wasn't so much he couldn't do the work, but he just wasn't feeling connected. In the cafeteria, he met a group of young men and was talking to them, and they invited him to go to an improv class with him. And he said, is that going to be all right with your teacher? And they said yes, and the teacher said yes. So he sat in on the improv class. He loved it. It was a passion. It ignited him. He dropped his other courses, took all the acting courses he could find, and within a month he was a lead in one of the plays in the community college. From there, his career just continued to soar. Now I'm bringing up, I want to just share something that he said. This is what happens when you follow God's lead and do what brings you joy. I don't need the cane or the painkillers anymore. Healing came from the work I was doing, the friends, the new passion I discovered. I'm the least likely guy to end up in several hit TV series, let alone star in a Hollywood movie. Me, a blue-collar kid from West Virginia. But when I look back, I can see how being an altar boy, doing a paper route, going to the steel mill, even the debilitating back injury brought me to where I am today. Still, I can't help asking myself, what if I hadn't been sitting in that cafeteria that day? What if I hadn't gone to that improv class with those guys? I've learned, like the priest I play in All Saints, the movie, that when God sends a suggestion our way, the best thing we can do for ourselves is say yes. I want to relate that story because he used a couple of things I've talked about this evening. First of all, he was focused on his classes. He was not feeling good about them, but he was focused on them. He went to the cafeteria for a break, so he was letting his mind wander. And in that wandering, he opened himself up to a discussion with some young men in the cafeteria. He also opened himself up to the possibility of going to the improv class, and bang, he found his passion and continued on from there. John was also a prayer, so he did his prayer work. We have our own spiritual practices in Science of Mind, and I don't want to go over all of them this evening, but I recommend to you affirmations and affirmative prayer or spiritual mind treatment. If you're not familiar, if you're new to this Wednesday evening series, new to the church, I recommend that you go to our prayer room on Sundays after service. The prayer room is open via Zoom. Get into Zoom and talk to a practitioner about affirmative prayer and have them do an affirmative prayer for you. It'll give you a taste of what I'm talking about. Create your affirmations, create your affirmative prayer, and put it in your tool belt. So this evening, I've talked about a lot of tools that we can use to move forward in our lives, to move forward in working with our emotions, our mental states, and finally, our spiritual state. And as we move forward, I'd like to end with this quote from Dr. Holmes. We must come to see that the whole world is striving and struggling upward and onward. We must come to find meaning in passing human events. The world will have to learn to live together in peace and mutual cooperation. And now is our opportunity to use those words, to use our spiritual tool belt, and move forward.
Let's pray. We are in the presence of the Beloved. Right where we are, God is. And while we acknowledge, while we are willing to face, while we are willing to confront the circumstances, the conditions, the effects that we find ourselves in this moment, we turn. We turn and we rise in consciousness to that one mind, that one source, where there is a perfect pattern that is ready to outpicture through and as each of us in exactly the right way in all cases. And so I speak this word for abundance and prosperity, knowing that there is an infinite good that is ever available. And so I invite all who are hearing this prayer in the moment of silence to speak the name or names of those for whom you are affirming abundance and prosperity. Likewise, I speak this word for perfect health, perfect mental health, perfect physical health, divine right alignment, right functioning, right ordering, knowing that that perfect pattern of wellness and wholeness is available to all in each and every moment. So I invite all who hear this prayer in this moment of silence that follows to speak the name or names of those whom they are affirming perfect health, wellness, and wholeness for. I speak this word in this moment for harmonious, loving, compassionate, right relationships, for deep and abiding and outpicturing harmony on all levels and all ways. And I invite all hearing this prayer to speak the names in this moment of silence, speak into this moment of silence the names for those whom we are claiming perfect harmony and right relationship. And I speak this word of peace, guidance, unity, equality, justice, knowing that there is a perfection of a world in which all are held in dignity, grace, compassion, and beauty. And that world already exists, complete and fulfilled within the mind of God, and it is right now simply outpicturing in exactly the right way, in exactly the right time, in the various situations and circumstances in our individual and collective lives. It is already fulfilled within the mind of God. I claim it to be so. And I'm grateful to know that this word is already fulfilled. Thus I release it into the law which is unstoppable, the law which is always at work and is infinitely creative. Thus my work, my word is done. And so it is.
Thank you for listening to the Mile High Church podcast. This podcast is made possible by the generous contributions from listeners like you. If you'd like to make a donation, please visit us at milehighchurch.org. Have a fabulous day.